The world ended on a Tuesday, not with a bang, but with two faint pink lines on a plastic stick. Pregnant. The word was a sunbeam, warm and impossible, slicing through the sterile white of the resort bathroom. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but from a joy so fierce it stole her breath. Martin's child. Theirs. A tiny, secret promise of a future she'd always dreamed of. She practically floated out of the bathroom, the pregnancy test clutched in her hand like a holy relic, and her heart hammered a frantic, happy rhythm against her ribs. She was going to tell him. Now. They'd laugh. They'd cry. Maybe he'd even lift her up and spin her around like in the movies. But then, she saw them. Through the grand open-air archway of their private villa, Martin stood with her best friend, Chloe. His back was to her, but Chloe's face was a canvas of adoration. His hand was stroking Chloe's cheek. The gesture was so tender, so possessively gentle, it made Arya's stomach clench into a knot of ice. Her body moved on instinct, pulling her back into the shadows of the hallway. "Can't keep doing this, Martin." Chloe's voice was a soft murmur carried on the warm, salty air. "Arya's going to find out." Martin's laugh was a low, smooth sound, the same sound that had soothed her to sleep 1,000 times. Now it was a razor blade against her soul. "Relax. She's too busy planning a wedding I have no intention of letting happen." Each word was a hammer blow. The sunbeam of joy from moments before shattered, leaving behind a cold, desolate darkness. The plastic test in her hand felt heavy, a burden, a secret he would never share. Chloe leaned in, her lips brushing his. "And the baby? He knew?" "A complication," Martin said, his voice breezy, confident. "One I'll handle. Trust me." His casual dismissal cut through her shock, and what followed was a surge of pure, unadulterated fury. It propelled her forward, out of the shadows and into the blinding sunlight of the patio. They sprang apart. Guilt was a garish stain on Chloe's face, but Martin just looked annoyed, bothered, like she'd interrupted an important business call. "Arya," he began, his tone shifting to that indulgent condescension she now realized she hated. "Don't overreact." She didn't know what scared her more, the betrayal or the chilling emptiness in his eyes. He didn't love her. Maybe he never had. Her voice, when she found it, was a rasp. "Get out." He scoffed. "Darling, this is my villa. Remember?" In that moment, something inside her shifted. The naive, trusting girl she'd been just 5 minutes ago died a swift, brutal death. In her place stood a woman, a mother with nothing left to lose. "Then I'm leaving," she said, her voice trembling but firm. She threw the pregnancy test onto the marble table between them. It clattered, a tiny, pathetic sound in the sudden, roaring silence. His eyes flickered down to it, widening in a flash of genuine surprise before hardening again. Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving the ruins of her life behind her. Her only thought, a frantic, desperate prayer, hammered in her skull with every step. "I need to get off this island. Now." Her world had narrowed to a single burning point of escape. The opulent resort, once a paradise, now felt like a cage. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to run. Away from him. Away from the ghost of a future that had just been murdered in cold blood. Her instincts surged, and she ran, not just from Martin, but toward an unknown that couldn't possibly be worse than the hell she was leaving behind.
The docks stank of salt, diesel, and desperation. Alpha King Rydian, hiding under the borrowed name of Sawyer, kept his head down, the collar of his worn jacket pulled up against the biting sea wind. Every face in the crowd was a potential threat, every shout a possible alarm. He was a king in exile, a hunter who had become the hunted, and the weight of it settled in his bones like a permanent chill. He needed a boat, not a chartered yacht with a smiling captain, but a fast, untraceable vessel that could get him off this godforsaken tourist trap and back to the wild, rugged coast of his own lands. His pack was in turmoil. His beta's last message a frantic, coded warning of a coup orchestrated by the one wolf he'd trusted as a brother, Lord Valerius. The name was acid on his tongue. And then, he saw her, a woman, running. Her frantic energy was a stark contrast to the lazy pace of the island. She wasn't a tourist taking a jog. She was prey, fleeing a predator he couldn't see. Her scent hit him first. Lilac, rain, and a fear so sharp it pricked at his senses. But beneath it, something else. Something that made his wolf, dormant and sullen for weeks, stir in his chest. A low growl rumbled. A possessive primal sound he quickly stifled. She was heading for the same grizzled old sailor he'd been about to hire. A man with a boat fast enough for his needs and a reputation for asking no questions. She reached the old man first, desperation making her voice high and breathless. "Please, I need to get to the mainland. Anywhere. I'll pay you whatever you want." The sailor grunted, eyeing her dismissively. "Sorry, lady. Boat's already taken." Her face fell, a mask of such utter despair that Rydian felt an unwelcome and dangerous tug of sympathy. He stepped forward, his shadow falling over her. "The boat is mine," he said, his voice a low growl, "and I travel alone." She spun around, her eyes the color of a stormy sea, widening as they met his. For a single heartbeat, the world shifted. The crowded dock, the chattering tourists, the screeching gulls. It all faded away into a dull, distant roar. In the span of a breath, all that existed was the space between them, charged and electric. The mark on his shoulder, the symbol of the Alpha King, tingled with a strange, forgotten heat. "Mate," his wolf whispered, a word so sacred and so impossible it felt like a hallucination. He shoved the thought down, crushing it with years of discipline. A mate was a weakness he could not afford. Not now. But deep down he knew the truth. This was no coincidence. Fate had just thrown a match into the gunpowder of his life. Her desperation, however, was stronger than his resolve. "Please," she begged, turning her plea to him. "I have to get off this island. I'll stay out of your way, I won't even speak. Just, please." He should have said no. He should have walked away. But looking at her, he saw the same hunted look that stared back at him from his own reflection. And maybe it was fate, or maybe it was madness, but the word that came out of his mouth was not the one he intended. "Get on." The sailor grumbled, but took the extra cash Rydian shoved at him without another word. The woman, Aria, he heard the sailor call her, scrambled aboard, clutching a small bag to her chest, as if it held the last hope in the world. As the boat pulled away from the dock and into the churning open water, Rydian stood at the stern, watching the island recede. He didn't know what scared him more, the traitors hunting him from behind, or the impossible fated woman now standing at the bow of his boat, facing the storm that was brewing on the horizon. A storm that felt like an omen for everything to come. Her scent was already wrapping around him, a temptation he had to resist. Because of that, he knew this journey would be a new kind of hell. The sky darkened with unnatural speed. One moment the sun was a hazy disk in the afternoon sky, and the next, a bruise-purple canopy slammed down over the world, choking the light. The wind shifted from a brisk sea breeze to a shrieking banshee in the span of a breath. This was no ordinary squall. Rydian gripped the helm, knuckles white, his muscles straining against the violent bucking of the boat. He could taste it in the air, a bitter metallic tang that wasn't ozone. It was magic, dark and ancient. Valerius wasn't just sending soldiers, he was sending sorcerers, which meant they knew he was on the water. They were trying to drown him in a watery grave. The boat crested a wave the size of a small house, then plunged into the trough with a bone-jarring crash. Water, cold as the abyss, exploded over the deck. He risked a glance at the woman. Aria. She was huddled near the small cabin, drenched and pale, her eyes wide with a terror that was entirely rational. But in that moment, as the wind howled his name and the sea clawed at his vessel, His wolf cared nothing for rationality. It cared nothing for his escape, for his throne, for the traitors hunting him. It cared only for her. Protect her, the beast roared, a singular, overwhelming command that eclipsed everything else. A growl rose in his throat, lost in the storm's fury. Rain lashed down, not falling but machine-gunning the sea, each drop a frozen needle against his skin. He fought the wheel, his alpha strength the only thing keeping them from being swamped. But the magic was a living thing, a malevolent intelligence that anticipated his every move. It wasn't just a storm, it was an executioner. Another wave, bigger this time, loomed over them, a wall of black churning water. Time stood still. He saw her face, saw her lips part in a silent scream. He let go of the wheel. His body moved on instinct, a blur of motion as he lunged for her, his only thought to shield her with his own body, to be her anchor in the chaos. Before he could reach her, the world flipped. Wood splintered. The roar of the ocean became an all-consuming, deafening silence as the cold, black water swallowed them whole. Darkness closed in, and his last conscious thought was not of his kingdom, but of a scent of lilac and rain, being torn away from him.
Pain. That was the first thing. A raw, scraping pain in her cheek. The second was the sound. The gentle, rhythmic shush of water stroking sand, a sound so peaceful it had to be a lie. Her breath caught and she coughed, expelling a lungful of salt water that burned her throat. She pushed herself up, her body screaming in protest. Sand grated against her skin, clinging to her wet clothes, her hair. Sunlight burned against her eyelids. She was alive. Her hand went instantly to her stomach, a desperate, protective gesture. Please be okay. The thought was a prayer, a frantic plea to a universe that had just tried to kill her. She scrambled to her feet, her thoughts spinning. The island, the boat, the storm, the man. Sawyer. Her eyes scanned the shoreline, a beautiful and brutal curve of white sand littered with the splintered remains of their boat. And then she saw him. A dark shape sprawled on the sand, unnervingly still, 100 yards away. Without thinking, she ran. Her legs felt like lead, and every breath was a fire in her chest. But she ran. He couldn't be dead. He just couldn't. Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was just the terrifying reality of her situation, but she knew she couldn't survive this place alone. She fell to her knees beside him. His face was pale, a nasty gash bleeding freely just above his temple. His breathing was shallow. But it was there. Relief, sharp and dizzying, washed through her. He was big, she realized. The worn jacket he'd had on was gone, and the simple t-shirt underneath was plastered to a body built of solid, powerful muscle. Even unconscious, he radiated an aura of danger, of contained power. But then she saw it. On his arm. A strange, swirling tattoo that looked almost like a brand. And something else. A deep, jagged scar on his side that looked recent, puckered and angry. It was weeping blood, the salt water doing it no favors. Deep down, she knew the truth. This man was more than just a grumpy boat captain. He was running from something just as terrifying as she was. She pressed her hands against the wound on his side, the warm, sticky feel of his blood a shocking contrast to his cold skin. "Hey," she said, her voice trembling. She shook his shoulder, gently at first, then with more force. "Hey, wake up. You can't die. Do you hear me? You are not allowed to die." He didn't stir, so she did the only thing she could. She tore a strip from the hem of her own shirt and pressed it firmly against the wound, a makeshift bandage. She had to stop the bleeding, because if he died, she and her baby would be next. As the silence stretched, broken only by the waves, she realized how truly, utterly alone they were.
He woke to the scent of lilac and the soft, hesitant touch of a woman's hand on his face. For a disoriented moment, he thought he was dreaming. A pleasant dream after a lifetime of nightmares, But then, the pain hit him. A searing fire in his side and a dull, throbbing ache in his head. His eyes snapped open. Arya was leaning over him, her brow furrowed with a concentration that was strangely beautiful. Her stormy eyes widened when she saw he was awake, and she snatched her hand back as if burned. He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness and a sharp protest from his side sent him back down with a groan. His healing. It was slow. Sluggish. The dark magic from the storm still clung to him like a shroud, and he suspected the old wound on his side, a parting gift from Valerius's assassins laced with silver, had been torn open in the wreck. He was weak. A king, rendered as helpless as a newborn pup. He hated it. "Don't move," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "You're bleeding." "Where are we?" he rasped, his throat raw. "I have no idea," she answered, her honesty brutal. "An island. The boat's gone. This is all that's left." She gestured to the debris-strewn beach. He pushed himself up on his elbows, ignoring the screaming from his body. The island was lush. Too lush. The jungle rose up behind the beach like a solid green wall, impenetrable and alive. It felt ancient, and it felt empty. No sign of life. No resorts. No boats. No people. Just them. As a result, a cold dread settled in his gut. Valerius's magic hadn't just sunk his boat. It had thrown him miles off course, into a place no one would ever think to look. "We need to find shelter," he grunted, forcing himself to his feet. "And water." She stood up too, watching him with wary eyes. He saw the questions there, the suspicion. She was right to be suspicious. He was a lie wrapped in a mystery. "First, you need to let me look at that cut on your side," she insisted. In that moment, she wasn't the terrified girl from the dock. Something had shifted. She was a survivor. He wanted to refuse, to snarl at her to stay away, to handle it himself. But his body betrayed him, and he swayed on his feet. Before she could move to help him, he steadied himself against a piece of driftwood, his pride a raw, open wound. He was the Alpha King. He did not need help. And yet, here he was, beaten, stranded, and relying on a human woman who carried the scent of his destiny. "Fine," he bit out. As she worked, her touch surprisingly gentle as she cleaned the wound with a piece of cloth she'd rinsed in a rock pool, their eyes locked. "We survived this," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with a fierce, unbreakable resolve. "Together." He didn't answer. He just stared as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the endless, empty ocean in shades of orange and pink. He saw the truth in her words. Their separate, desperate flights had ended. Instead, a new, shared nightmare had just begun.
Come morning, the rising sun did not bring hope. It brought a suffocating, wet heat that clung to her skin like a second skin. The jungle, which had been a dark, ominous wall the night before, was now a living, breathing entity. It was loud, a chaotic symphony of buzzing insects, screeching birds, and rustling things she couldn't see. Her world had shrunk to this strip of sand and the terrifying, vibrant green beyond. And him. Sawyer. He was pushing himself too hard she could see it. A grim, stubborn line was etched around his mouth, and his face was pale beneath his tan. Every movement was stiff, pained. "We need water," he stated, his voice a low rasp. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. "Okay," she said, pushing down the tremor in her own voice. Her thirst was a desperate, clawing thing at the back of her throat. For the baby. She had to be strong for the baby. "Okay. Where?" He just grunted and started toward the tree line, his steps heavy but determined. She followed, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. In the span of a breath, the cool sea breeze vanished, replaced by the thick, humid air of the jungle. Huge leaves, slick with moisture, brushed against her arms. The smell of damp earth and decaying flowers was overwhelming. It felt like the whole forest was watching them. After what felt like an eternity of pushing through thick undergrowth, a new sound reached her ears, a soft, melodic splashing. Hope, fierce and sudden, bloomed in her chest. Moments later, they stumbled into a small clearing. A stream of crystal-clear water tumbled over moss-covered rocks into a serene, shallow pool. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She practically fell to her knees at the edge of the pool, cupping the cool, clean water in her hands and drinking greedily. It was life, pure and simple. Sawyer knelt beside her, his movements more measured. He drank, but his eyes never stopped moving, scanning the clearing, the trees, the shadows. He was like a caged predator, aware of every sound, every shift in the wind. As the silence stretched, she felt it too. A sudden, unnatural quiet. The insects stopped buzzing. The birds went silent. It was as if the forest held its breath. She looked at him, and the intensity in his gaze sent a shiver down her spine. The feeling of being watched was no longer a vague premonition. It was a cold, hard certainty. What followed was the terrifying realization that the dangers of this island were far more than just starvation and thirst. Weakness was a poison, and it was flooding his veins. Ridian hated it more than he had ever hated anything. Every step was a battle, his injured side a searing fire that his sluggish healing couldn't quench. He felt the eyes on them, the unseen predators of the jungle, and his wolf snarled in his mind, enraged by his inability to properly scent them, to challenge them. But even worse than the physical pain was her. Arya. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't crying. Instead, she was just coping. Her quiet resilience was a constant, infuriating reminder of his own compromised state. He was the Alpha King. He should be the one providing, protecting, leading. But then, he stumbled, his leg giving out as a wave of dizziness washed over him. He caught himself on a tree before he could fall, his breath hissing through his teeth. "Are you okay?" Her voice was soft, laced with a concern that felt like pity. It chafed at his pride. "I'm fine," he snarled, shoving himself upright. She didn't argue. She just watched him with those stormy eyes that saw far too much. And that was worse. He would have preferred a fight. Despite that, he knew they needed shelter. His instincts, at least, were still sharp. He followed the flow of the stream, his senses telling him there would be rock formations nearby. He was right. Tucked behind the small waterfall was a shallow cave, shielded from view, its entrance narrow and defensible. "Here," he grunted. "This will have to do." The cave was damp and smelled of wet stone, but it was shelter. As they cleared away loose rocks and damp leaves, a strange sort of rhythm settled between them. They didn't speak. They just worked. Later, as he leaned against the cool rock wall, he watched her. She was staring out at the jungle, her arms wrapped around herself. The setting sun cast long, menacing shadows that danced between the trees. "You're not like most people," he found himself saying, the words rough. Her head snapped toward him, surprised. What's that supposed to mean? Most people would be useless by now, screaming, crying. Truth be told, he admired her strength, even if it grated on him. "You just keep going." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "I guess my life has been good practice for things falling apart." The words hung in the air, a hint of a backstory he suddenly desperately wanted to know. Before he could press, she changed the subject. "What about you, Sawyer? What's your story? Why does a man who can handle himself like you do need to hire a rusty old boat to sneak off an island?" His jaw tightened. "My story isn't your concern." The moment their eyes locked, the air thickened. The tension broke when she finally looked away, but something had shifted. A fragile, tentative thread of connection had been spun in the darkness of the cave. To make things worse, his gaze drifted to the damp earth just outside their shelter. He saw it then, something his weakened senses had missed before. A footprint. It was large, human, and barefoot. And it was fresh. His blood ran cold. He had been so focused on the unseen predators in the trees, he hadn't considered the most dangerous predator of all. Man. They were not alone. That night, the jungle came alive with new sounds. Chirps, howls, and clicks that echoed in the darkness, making the tiny cave feel even smaller. Sawyer had managed to start a small, sputtering fire, its flickering light a weak shield against the encroaching shadows. He sat on the other side of it, a silent, brooding statue carved from granite. He hadn't told her what he'd seen that had made him so tense, but she felt it. A new, sharper edge to his vigilance. "What are you running from?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The darkness made her bold. He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. "Monsters." Before she could ask what he meant, a sound from outside cut through the jungle's chorus. A twig snap, loud, close. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. Sawyer was on his feet, moving with a fluid grace that defied his injuries. Before she could even process what was happening, he was in front of her, pushing her toward the back of the cave. His body was a solid wall of heat and muscle, shielding her completely. Her heart skipped. A beat later, a low growl rumbled through the cave, and it took her a terrifying moment to realize the sound was coming from him. It wasn't human. It was deep, guttural, and utterly primal. A shape emerged from the darkness, blocking the cave entrance. Her breath caught. It was a wolf. But it was impossible. It was huge, bigger than any wolf she had ever seen or read about, its shoulders as high as a man's chest. Its fur was the color of midnight, tipped with silver that seemed to gleam in the firelight. But its eyes? Its eyes were what truly stole her breath. They glowed with an eerie, golden light, and they were fixed on them with a terrifying, unnerving intelligence. This was no mere animal. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. Her world narrowed to the massive creature in front of them and the impossibly strange man shielding her. She was trapped. But then, the wolf did something strange. It lowered its head slightly, not in aggression, but in something that looked eerily like acknowledgement. Its gaze flickered from Sawyer to her, and for a heart-stopping second, she felt as if it were looking right through her, seeing the tiny, secret life she carried within. As if summoned by some unseen signal, the wolf lifted its head and let out a long, haunting howl that was less a cry of aggression and more one of profound sorrow. The sound echoed through the jungle, filled with a loneliness that ached in her very bones, and just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. It simply melted back into the shadows, leaving only the crackling fire and a silence that roared in Arya's ears. She stared at the empty cave entrance, her mind reeling. She turned to look at Sawyer, to ask, to demand an explanation, but the look on his face stopped her. It was a look of grim, deadly certainty, the look of a man who had just come face to face with one of his monsters. The wolf was gone, but the echo of its howl seemed permanently etched into the silence of the cave. The air was thick with unspoken questions, with a tension so heavy she could taste it. She stared at Sawyer, who had returned to his side of the fire, but he was no longer just a mysterious man. He was an impossibility. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He stared into the flames, his profile hard and unforgiving. "A wolf." "No." She shook her head, frustration boiling over. "No, that's not what it was. And you growled at it." The accusation hung in the air between them, sharp and dangerous. "It was like you knew each other. What aren't you telling me?" His jaw clenched. "I am telling you that this island is more dangerous than we thought. That wolf is a predator, and it's not the only one here." Deep down, she knew he was hiding something far more significant. His eyes, for a fleeting moment when he'd faced the beast, had held the same feral golden glow. The memory made her shiver. but then he looked at her, and the desperation in his gaze silenced her. It was the look of a man clinging to his last secret by a thread. "There are tracks outside the cave," he said, his voice low and urgent, deliberately changing the subject. "Human tracks. Whoever it is, he's a hunter. And right now, we're on his territory." His words were a splash of cold water, dragging her back from the supernatural abyss to the immediate physical threat. A human hunter, on a deserted island. As if pulled by a string, her fear shifted targets. A monster she could see was somehow more terrifying than one she couldn't understand. "So what do?" she asked, her own survival instincts surging. "We find him," Sawyer said, his voice turning to steel, "before he finds us." The moment their eyes locked, she knew the fragile truce between them had changed. It was no longer just about survival. It was about trust, and he was giving her none of it. She didn't know what scared her more. The giant wolf in the jungle, the unseen hunter, or the storm of secrets raging within the man sitting right in front of her.
The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. Every instinct, every fiber of his being screamed at him to tell her the truth, to show her his mark, to claim her. But he couldn't. Not when he was like this, weak, hunted, a king of nothing but a damp cave and a flickering fire. Revealing his nature to her now would be a weakness, a burden she didn't deserve. So, he focused on the hunt. It was familiar ground. He followed the tracks come morning, his senses slowly, blessedly, returning to him as the last of the sorcerer's magic faded. The scent of the man was stale, at least a day old. He was a survivor, tough and wiry, his scent laced with old blood and a bitter resentment that clung to the air. Arya followed behind him, quiet and watchful. He could feel her gaze on his back, feel her suspicion. The space between them burned with everything he refused to say. After an hour, he noticed the markings, crude symbols carved into the bark of ancient trees. His blood ran cold. He knew these marks. They were warnings, the archaic sigils of an exile, a wolf cast out from the pack, a shifter, which meant the massive black wolf from last night was not a beast. It was a person, an outcast. His heart hammered against his ribs. This island, it wasn't just a random speck in the ocean. No matter how hard he tried to deny it, he knew. It was a dumping ground, a prison, a place where his own people sent their disgraced and their forgotten to live out their days as little more than animals. And Valerius had sent him here. The realization was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. This wasn't a failed assassination attempt. It was a perfectly executed plan. Valerius hadn't just tried to kill him. He had sentenced him to the same fate as the traitors and madmen his father had exiled decades ago. Moments later, they found the camp. A crude lean-to, a fire pit, and several animal pelts stretched out to dry. It was empty, but the scent was strong. The hunter would be back soon. As his eyes swept the camp, he saw it. A flash of dark crimson fabric snagged on a branch. He moved toward it, his gut twisting into a knot. He pulled it free. It was a tattered piece of a banner. Faded but still visible on its surface was the scorched, blackened sigil of the Onyx Citadel's Royal Guard, Valerius's personal unit. The hunter wasn't just an exile. He was one of his own men, a traitor, discarded here after some past failure. A fury so cold and absolute washed over Ridian that the world seemed to narrow to a single point of rage. Valerius's betrayal was a serpent that had been coiled at the heart of his kingdom for years. In the quiet that followed, as the truth unraveled in his mind, he heard it. A low, clear whistle, cutting through the jungle hum. It was a signal he'd taught his guards himself. The hunter was coming home.
Without warning, Sawyer grabbed her arm, his grip like iron, and pulled her behind a curtain of thick, hanging vines. "Don't move. Don't make a sound," he breathed, his voice a low, urgent command. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the sudden adrenaline a shock to her system. A man stepped into the clearing. He was huge, built like a boulder, with a wild, matted beard and skin tanned to leather. He carried a crude spear and moved with a heavy, deliberate confidence. He stopped, his head tilting as he sniffed the air. He knew they were there. The silence roared. Then, everything happened at once. The man lunged toward their hiding spot, and Sawyer exploded into motion. He moved with a speed that wasn't human, a blur of controlled violence. He met the hunter head-on. The impact was brutal, the sound of the collision echoing through the clearing. They fought with a desperate, savage intensity. The hunter was strong, but Sawyer was something else. He dodged and weaved, his movements fluid and predatory. At one point, the hunter swung the butt of his spear, a blow that should have crushed Sawyer's ribs. But Sawyer twisted, impossibly fast, catching the spear and wrenching it away. As the hunter stumbled off balance, Sawyer slammed him to the ground, a single, precise blow rendering him unconscious. Arya stared, her mind struggling to process what she had just seen. The speed, the strength. It wasn't possible. She stepped out from behind the vines, her legs trembling. What was that? She whispered, her gaze fixed on him. How did you do that? He stood over the fallen man, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing with a golden light that was terrifyingly familiar. He turned to face her, and in his expression, she saw a man cornered, a man with no lies left to tell. "What are you?" she demanded, her voice rising, cracking with fear and confusion. The tension broke. With a ragged sigh, he finally gave in. "You've seen what I am," he said, his voice rough with resignation. "I'm like the wolf from last night." He pushed up the sleeve of his torn shirt. There, on the hard muscle of his shoulder, was the swirling, intricate mark she'd seen when he was unconscious. It seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. "I'm a shifter." Her world tilted. Shifter. The word was from fantasy, from myth. It didn't belong here in her broken, messy reality. But as she looked from his glowing eyes to the impossible mark on his shoulder, and replayed the inhuman speed of the fight, she knew it was the truth. She didn't run. She didn't scream. Her thoughts spun, and a strange, terrifying calm washed over her. The world hadn't just changed. It had revealed a new set of rules she never knew existed. She looked down at the unconscious hunter on the ground, then back up at Sawyer. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "Is he one too?"
Her question hung in the air, a shocking, impossible anchor in the chaos of the last few minutes. Is he one too? She wasn't screaming. She wasn't running. She was processing, adapting. And in that moment, his fear for her safety was eclipsed by a wave of raw, possessive awe. She was magnificent. "No," he said, his voice rough. He forced his gaze away from her and down to the groaning hunter, Kyle. "He's human. Just a guard dog left his post." He hauled Kale to his feet and slammed him against a tree, the impact echoing in the tense silence. "Talk," Ridian growled, letting a sliver of his true alpha command bleed into his voice. "Now, tell me everything about this island." Kale, his eyes wide with a terror that was immensely satisfying, started babbling. And the story he told was worse than anything Ridian had imagined. This island, this beautiful green hell, was known as the Forsaken Isle, a prison, a tomb, a place where shifters who broke the law were sent to be forgotten. "And the wolf?" Ridian demanded. "Silas," Kale choked out. "Exiled a decade ago. He blames the throne for his mate's death. He's gone feral. The isolation drives them mad, you know. My orders were to hunt him. But then you showed up, and my orders changed. Lord Valeria said no one leaves this island, especially not you." The pieces clicked into place, forming a mosaic of treachery so profound it stole his breath. Valerius hadn't just sent him here to die. He had sent him into a cage with a mad wolf who held a grudge against his family. "We can't kill him." Arya's voice cut through his rage. He turned, stunned. She was looking at Kyle, her expression cold and calculating. If we kill him, we have no leverage. We have no idea what other traps he's set. She's right, he said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face as he looked back at the terrified guard. He was done running. He was done hiding. It was time to be the king he was born to be. You're going to help us. Arya stepped forward, her chin lifted. And, she added, her voice ringing with newfound authority, you're going to tell us everything you know about that Black Wolf. Because he's the real threat here, isn't he? He saw the shift in her then. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a player in the game, and with her standing beside him for the first time in a long time, he felt like he might actually win.
The world now operated on a new set of rules, and she was learning them at a terrifying speed. Shifters were real. Magic was real. And the grumpy, secretive man she was stranded with was one of them. Bizarrely, the revelation didn't fill her with fear. Instead, it filled her with a strange sense of clarity. It explained the golden eyes, the inhuman grace, the possessive way he looked at her that made fire bloom beneath her skin. Their plan was insane. They were going to use Kale, their captive, to lure the feral shifter Silas into a trap. As they worked, weaving a net from thick, fibrous vines, Sawyer, or Ridian, as Kale had called him, a name that felt both foreign and deeply familiar, taught her things she should not have been able to learn. "Scent is everything," he murmured, his voice close to her ear as he showed her how to position the trap downwind. "It tells you who is near, what they're feeling, fear, anger, hunger." She closed her eyes and inhaled, concentrating, and she could smell it. The sharp, coppery tang of Kale's fear, the damp, earthy smell of the jungle, and beneath it all, his scent, pine, wood smoke, and something wild and uniquely him. It was comforting, which was the most insane part of all. As if he could read her mind, he spoke again, his voice softer now. "It's a lonely existence, always hiding a part of yourself, always feeling separate." Her chest ached with a sudden, sharp empathy. She knew what it was like to feel separate, to carry a secret that isolated you from the world. Her hand drifted to her still, flat stomach. "You don't have to be," she whispered, the words leaving her lips before she could stop them. The moment their eyes locked, the air thickened. The space between them burned with an intensity that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with a raw, undeniable pull. He took a half step closer, his big, warm hand coming up to cup her cheek. His touch was electric, a jolt that went straight to her core. As if fate demanded it, a sharp cry from Kyle broke the spell. "He's coming!" They sprang into position. Moments later, the massive black wolf, Silas, stalked into the clearing, drawn by Kale's scent. He was even more terrifying up close, a creature of shadow and muscle and burning, hateful eyes. He lunged for Kale and Ridian yanked the rope. The vine net sprang up, enclosing the massive wolf in a tangle of green. It roared, a sound of pure fury, thrashing against its bonds. They had done it. They had captured a monster. But then, Silas threw back his head and let out a howl. It wasn't a cry of defeat. It was a summons. A deep, resonant call that made the very air vibrate. Something inside her shifted, a strange, cold dread that had nothing to do with the trapped wolf. The howl was a key turning in a lock, and she had the terrifying feeling that it had just unleashed something far, far worse.
The howl ripped through the air, and Ridian felt it in his bones, not as a sound but as a shockwave of pure, malicious power. "The island," it answered. Silas, thrashing in the net, stopped. He turned his burning, intelligent eyes on Ridian, and a guttural laugh rumbled in his chest. Then he spoke, not in the common tongue, but in the old wolf language, a series of snarls and clicks Arya wouldn't understand. "You are a fool to come here, little prince," Silas snarled. "Valerius didn't send you here to be killed by me. He sent you here to be unmade." A cold dread, colder than the ocean that had tried to claim him, washed through Ridian. "What are you talking about?" He growled back in the same tongue. "This island, it is cursed," Silas spat, a mad glee in his golden eyes. "A curse woven by your own court sorcerers. It feeds on our kind. It severs the bond between man and wolf. It drives us mad. My howl did not call for help, Your Majesty. It was a trigger. It told the island that a new powerful soul had arrived, and it is very, very hungry." As the words left the black wolf's lips, Ridian felt it. A tremor, deep in his soul. A cold, alien anger that was not his own began to seep into his thoughts. His wolf, his other half, which had been a source of strength and pride his entire life, suddenly felt wrong. It felt like a cornered animal, lashing out not at the enemy in front of him but at the cage of his own mind. The instinct to protect, to provide, was twisting into something darker. Possess, control, destroy. He stumbled back, his hand flying to his head as a wave of feral hunger washed over him. He wanted to hunt. He wanted to bite. He wanted to claim. This was Valerius's true plan. Not to have him killed, but to have him erased. To let the island strip away his humanity until all that remained was a mindless, raging beast bearing his face. "Sawyer?" Arya's voice cut through the red haze. She was close, her hand reaching for his arm. He flinched away, as if her touch were fire. A low, vicious growl escaped his lips, a sound he couldn't control. The predator inside him looked at her, and for a terrifying second, it didn't see a mate to be protected. It saw prey. Horror, stark and absolute, ripped through him. He saw the confusion and hurt in her eyes, and it was a blade to his soul. "Stay away from me," he snarled, the words torn from his throat. He wasn't warning her away for her sake. He was begging her, because in that moment, the monster he was running from was himself. The world was noise, a roaring, screaming symphony of rage that was not his own. The curse, triggered and awake, was a parasite in his soul, whispering poison into the bond with his wolf. His senses, usually a source of strength, were now instruments of torture. The rustle of every leaf was a shout. The scent of the damp earth was a suffocating blanket, and Arya's scent. Her scent was an agony of need so profound, it threatened to shatter his sanity. Mine. The thought wasn't his. It belonged to the beast, the feral, twisted thing his wolf was becoming. It saw her not as a mate to be cherished, but as a territory to be claimed, a possession to be guarded with snarling teeth. He stumbled away from her, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. He had to fight it. He had to hold on. With the last of his coherent thought, he stalked over to the bound hunter, Kale, and checked the knots, pulling them so tight the man cried out. He couldn't risk any additional threats, not now. Then he retreated to the edge of the clearing, putting as much distance between himself and Arya as he could. He braced his hands against a massive banyan tree, his head bowed, his muscles locked in a war against his own body. The urge to go to her, to drag her into the cave and keep her there, away from all other eyes, was a physical sickness. A helpless, furious roar ripped from his throat, and he slammed his fist into the tree trunk. Pain, white-hot and sharp, shot up his arm, but it was a welcome distraction from the war raging in his mind. The sound of splintering bark echoed in the sudden, tense silence. He was losing. He could feel his humanity, his memories, his very name, slipping through his fingers like sand. And he was terrified that the face she would be left with in the end wouldn't be his at all.
She watched him, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. This was worse than the storm, worse than the hunter. Seeing him in such agony, at war with himself, was a unique and terrible kind of pain. He was fighting so hard, and the raw violence of him punching the tree was a testament to his desperation. She couldn't just stand here and do nothing. Despite his warning, she took a cautious step toward him. "Sawyer, stay back," he snarled, not even turning around. The venom in his voice made her flinch, but she held her ground. It was then that another voice, A dry, rasping sound cut through the tension. He is fighting a battle he cannot win. She spun around. The captured wolf, Silas, was watching them from the net, his golden eyes glowing with a cunning intelligence. Cale was passed out, but Silas was very much awake. "The island is in his blood now," Silas continued in the common tongue, his voice surprisingly clear. "It will consume him. It will strip away the man and leave only the beast." "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "There has to be a way to stop it." The wolf was silent for a long moment, a cruel, calculating look on its feral face. "There is one way to slow it. A mercy, if you will." Hope, desperate and dangerous, flared within her. "What is it?" "On the highest sea cliff of this island," he rasped, "there is a cave. Inside, moon petal flowers grow. They bloom only in the dark. Their essence, it can soothe the feral mind. Give him clarity. It will not cure him, but it will give him back to you, for a time." She looked from the cunning wolf to Ridian, who was now on his knees, his head in his hands. He was losing. She could feel it. This was a chance, maybe a lie, but it was the only chance they had. Her decision was instant. "I'll go." She walked over to Ridian, her resolve a fragile shield against her fear. She knelt in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "Hey," she said softly. "Look at me. There's a place. A cave with flowers. Silas says they can help." He looked up, and for a second, the feral light in his eyes dimmed, and she saw the man again, tortured, desperate, but still there. He saw the determination in her face, and a flicker of his own returned. He gave a single, ragged nod. As they left the clearing, leaving their prisoners behind, a low, rumbling laugh followed them from the net. She ignored it. She had to, because this sliver of hope was all she had left to cling to, and she held on to it with everything she had. She had to believe it wasn't a lie.
The climb was hell. Every step was a fresh wave of the curse, every gust of wind a chorus of whispers urging him to give in. The only thing keeping him tethered to himself was the sight of Arya ahead of him, her small, determined form navigating the treacherous cliffside path. Her scent was his only anchor in a sea of madness. They found the cave just as Silas had described, a dark fissure in the face of the cliff. The moment they stepped inside, he knew. It was a trap. The air wasn't clean or soothing, it was thick, heavy, and pulsed with the same corrupting magic as the storm, but 100 times stronger. This was not a place of healing. This was the heart of the curse. All around them, pale, ethereal flowers glowed with a sickly silver light, pulsing in time with the agony that suddenly erupted in his skull. He collapsed with a roar, his body convulsing. The curse, which had been seeping into him, now slammed into him like a tidal wave. The last fragile walls of his control shattered. His memories fractured, the faces of his pack, the weight of his crown, the sound of his own name. All of it was being shredded and swept away by a tide of pure, predatory instinct. He saw Arya's face, her eyes wide with horror as she realized her mistake. She led me here. She did this. The thought, paranoid and cruel, was the beast's, not his. Mine to punish, mine to claim. The last thing he clung to was her face, her name, Arya. But then, even that was twisted. She was no longer a woman to save. She was a prize to be won. The last battle was over, and he had lost.
The moment they entered the cave, she knew she had made a fatal mistake. The beautiful, glowing flowers were not a cure. They were a poison. She watched in horror as Ridian fell, his scream inhuman, a sound of a soul being torn apart. She saw the change happen. The last light of the man she knew was extinguished from his eyes, replaced by the flat, merciless gold of a pure predator. He rose to his feet, but it was not him. It was a monster wearing his face. She had failed. She had not only failed to save him, she had personally delivered him to his doom. Tears streamed down her face, tears of terror and of a grief so profound it felt like a physical wound. He lunged. She didn't even have time to scream. In a single fluid motion, he had her, his powerful body pinning her against the cold, damp rock of the cave wall. His face was inches from hers, his lips pulled back in a possessive snarl. A low, guttural growl rumbled deep in his chest, a sound that vibrated through her bones, promising violence and possession. The man was gone. The king was gone. All that was left was the beast, and she was trapped alone with it in the heart of the darkness. The beast wearing Sawyer's face had her pinned, the heat of his body a terrifying prison. A guttural, possessive growl vibrated from his chest into hers, a sound that promised to shatter bone and tear flesh. This was it. This was the end. Her mistake had cost them everything. But then, in the flat, merciless gold of his eyes, she saw it. A flicker. A tiny, trapped spark of pain that was purely, achingly human. It was him. Sawyer, Rydian, was still in there, drowning in the darkness she had led him into. In that moment, her terror gave way to a fierce, desperate clarity. Fighting him was impossible. Screaming was pointless. The beast wouldn't listen. But maybe the man would. Her body went limp, a complete, deliberate surrender. The shift was so unexpected that the pressure on her lessened for a fraction of a second. "Rydian?" she whispered, the name feeling strange and powerful on her lips. It was the first time she'd said it to his face. "I know you're in there. I know you can hear me." A snarl was her only answer, but she pressed on, her voice soft but steady. "I see you," she continued, her gaze locked on that tiny, struggling spark. "I see the man who stood at the helm of a boat in a storm he knew he couldn't win. I see the man who watched over me while I slept. The one who told me he was lonely." With every word, she was forging a lifeline, throwing it into the storm inside his mind. Her hand, trembling, came up to rest on her stomach. An unconscious, protective gesture. And as if pulled by a string, the beast's golden eyes flickered down to her hand. Something inside him shifted. His snarl faltered, replaced by a look of profound confusion. His grip loosened. The feral rage in his eyes wavered, warring with a dawning horror. He stumbled back from her, clutching his head as if it were about to split open. A raw, agonized cry was torn from his throat, a sound that was no longer just the beast's rage, but the man's suffering. He wasn't saved, not even close. But the battle she thought was lost had just found a new champion. Hope, fragile but fierce, bloomed in the darkness of the cave.
Her voice was an anchor. Her scent was a lighthouse. In the roaring, infinite sea of feral rage, she was the one, singular point of reality he could cling to. He was drowning, the curse pulling him under, but her words, and the sudden, inexplicable pull toward where her hand rested on her stomach. They gave him something to fight for. He fought his way back to the surface, gasping for air, for control. He was himself again, but it was a temporary victory. The curse was still there, a hungry tide waiting to drag him back under. They had to get out of the cave. Now. He staggered out into the fading daylight, Arya close behind him, her presence a warm, steadying weight at his side. And then he saw him. The black wolf, Silas, was perched on a rocky outcrop above, watching them with an unreadable expression. Not of triumph, but of weary expectation. Rage, pure and his own this time, surged through him. He had to end this. He looked at Arya, at the fierce, unwavering trust in her eyes, and knew he couldn't win this with brute force. He had to win it with his mind, with his birthright. "Silas," he called out, his voice raw, but carrying the innate authority of an alpha king. The wolf's ears twitched. Rydian switched to the old tongue, the words flowing like a river breaking a dam. "Valerius played us both for fools. He sent me here to be unmade by the curse your howl unleashed. He sentenced you to a slow, agonizing madness. Justice will not be found in my death. It will be found in his." Silas leaped down from the ledge, landing silently on the path before them. Words are wind, little prince. The throne has never cared for the fate of its exiles. Then let me prove you wrong, Ridian countered, taking a step forward. Help me break this curse. Help me get off this island and back to my throne. And I swear on my alpha mark, I will not only grant you a full pardon, I will personally oversee a new inquest into your mate's death. You will have true justice. You have my word. The feral wolf stared at him, his ancient, sorrowful eyes searching Ridian's face. He saw the desperation there, but he also saw the unyielding steel of a king making a vow. There is a way, Silas finally growled. An old way. A ritual site at the heart of the island. It can sever the curse. But the ritual requires a blood price. And the moment it begins, the magic will send a beacon straight to Valerius's sorcerers. They will know where you are. They will come. This was it. An all-or-nothing gambit. It would either save him or summon his executioners. We'll do it, Arya said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. Silas gave a slow, deliberate nod. Then we must hurry. The island will fight you every step of the way now, and the next time the beast takes you, it will not let go.
The journey was a waking nightmare. They raced through the rapidly darkening jungle following the silent, ghostly form of Silas. The island itself seemed to have turned against them. Thorny vines snagged at their clothes like grasping claws, and the shadows seemed to twist into monstrous shapes at the edge of her vision. But the true battle was the one happening right beside her. The curse was coming in waves, each one more powerful than the last. She could see it in the way Ridian's knuckles turned white in the predatory tightening of his jaw. Several times he stumbled, a low growl rising in his chest, and each time she became his anchor. "Ridian," she would say, her voice a firm, steady line in the chaos. "Look at me. Remember the boat. Remember the fire." She would talk about anything and everything, her voice a constant presence pulling him back from the edge. It was exhausting, a desperate, emotional marathon. She was no longer just surviving. She was fighting for his very soul, and with every word, she felt the bond between them solidify into something unbreakable. He was completely dependent on her, and in his vulnerability, she found a strength she never knew she possessed. Finally, Silas stopped. They had arrived. Before them was a clearing dominated by a circle of towering, ancient stones, each one carved with spiraling, glowing runes. This was the place. The air hummed with a raw, primal power that made the hair on her arms stand up. As if the world narrowed to this single spot, the last rays of sunlight died, plunging the world into twilight. Ridian cried out, falling to one knee. The wave she had been dreading, the final, overwhelming one, was crashing down on him. He looked up at her, his eyes flickering violently between human pain and feral gold. "Arya!" he gasped, his voice a shredded plea. "Now. It has to be now." He threw his head back, a roar of pure agony tearing from his throat as the beast began its final, brutal takeover. Her heart skipped. The climax was here, and they were out of time. Time stood still. Ridian was on his knees, a guttural roar of pure agony tearing from his throat as the beast inside him began its final hostile takeover. The ancient, glowing stones seemed to pulse with his pain. Silas, the black wolf, stood poised, his voice a low growl. "The blood price must be paid now, or he is lost." Her body moved on instinct. She rushed to Ridian's side, ignoring the feral light that was consuming his eyes. "Ridian, listen to me," she cried out, grabbing his face, forcing him to look at her. "It's not over. You don't give up. Do you hear me? You fight." His hand, now tipped with claws, lashed out, not at her, but at the sharpened central stone. Blood, dark and royal, welled up and dripped onto the glowing runes. The moment it did, the world exploded in a silent flash of blinding white light. The hum of the stones became a deafening roar. "Now, girl," Silas snarled. "Be his anchor! Hold on to him!" She didn't hesitate. She pressed her hands to his back, and the moment she made contact, she was ripped from her own body. She was inside his head, inside the storm. She saw it all. A snarling, monstrous wolf made of shadow and rage, locked in a death grip with the golden wolf of the man she knew. The beast was winning, dragging his soul into an abyss of pure, mindless instinct. She felt his pain, his despair, his terror of losing himself, and she wouldn't let it happen. She pushed back, not with force, but with feeling. She poured every memory, every shared moment of fear and hope, every ounce of the stubborn, impossible love that had grown in the ruins of her life, into the bond between them. "I am here," she thought, the words a silent scream in the psychic chaos. "I'm not letting you go." And she felt him, the man, turn toward her.
He was drowning in savagery. The curse was a triumphant roar, and his wolf was a monster he no longer recognized. He was moments from being extinguished forever. But then, he felt her. Aria. Not just her voice, but her soul. A warm, defiant light in the suffocating darkness. She was a shield, an anchor, a tether to the man he was. He saw their journey through her eyes. The fear, the trust, the quiet moments by the fire, the terror in the cave. Her belief in him was a weapon the curse had no defense against. He turned from the snarling beast and faced the memory of her, the feeling of her, and he found a new strength. He confronted the monster in his mind, but instead of fighting it, instead of trying to dominate it, he did something else. He accepted it. He merged with it, not as a master and a slave, but as two halves of a whole. He was a king, but he was also a wolf, a man, but also a beast. The rage of the curse was smothered by the balance of his own soul, reforged and made stronger. The feral red light faded. The snarling stopped. The storm broke. He collapsed onto the cold stone, every muscle screaming, his body shaking with exhaustion. But he was whole. He was sane. He was himself. The blinding light from the stones receded, but not before a massive, silent beacon of pure energy shot straight up into the night sky, a signal to the entire world. He pushed himself up, his eyes finding Aria's. The gratitude, the love, the sheer awe he felt for her was too immense for words. In the quiet that followed, a new sound broke the silence, a rhythmic, mechanical whirring, growing steadily louder. A helicopter. Silas let out a low growl beside him. "They're here." The helicopter descended, its searchlight cutting a harsh white circle in the ancient clearing. Black ropes dropped, and soldiers in tactical gear rappelled down, their weapons raised. They fanned out, forming a perimeter, their movements precise and deadly. His royal guard. Valerius's chosen few. They were expecting to find a feral beast to put down. They were not expecting to find their king. He got to his feet, weak but resolute. Silas, no longer an enemy, stood at his side, a formidable shadow of muscle and teeth. The soldiers froze, their shock a palpable wave in the air. Their commander, a hard-faced man named Marcus, whom Rydian knew was fiercely loyal to Valerius, recovered first. "The Alpha is compromised," Marcus shouted, raising his rifle. "The exile is with him. Subdue them both." Some of the guards hesitated, their loyalty torn. But Marcus and his inner circle advanced. Rydian didn't need to be at full strength. He just needed to be the Alpha. He drew himself up to his full height and let his Alpha command, pure and untainted, wash over them. "Hold," he said. The word was not loud, but it resonated with a power that shook the very stones beneath their feet. The loyal guards froze instantly. Marcus and the traitors, however, pushed through the command, their will fortified by their betrayal. They opened fire. What followed was a blur of brutal, close-quarters combat. Silas moved like a phantom, a whirlwind of black fur and claws, while the loyal guards engaged their former brothers. Rydian, despite his exhaustion, moved with the deadly grace of a king, disarming and disabling the traitors with calculated, non-lethal force. Within moments, it was over. The traitors were subdued, Marcus unconscious at his feet. The clearing was filled with the sounds of panting men and the low growl of Silas. He had reclaimed his authority. He turned, his gaze finding the only person who mattered. Arya. She was standing by the central stone, her expression a mixture of shock, terror, and awe. The adrenaline faded, and all that was left was the vast, uncharted territory between them. He walked toward her, the king returning to his queen.
The chaos of the fight faded into a strange, ringing silence. Men in black armor were kneeling. The massive black wolf stood guard. And Rydian. He was walking toward her. He was no longer Sawyer, the grumpy castaway. This was Rydian, the Alpha King. He moved with an ancient, undeniable power, his presence so immense it seemed to command the very air around him. He stopped just before her, the firelight from a burning torch casting flickering shadows across his strong, handsome face. "I owe you my life," he said, his voice a low, intimate rumble that was for her alone. "My soul." Now came the truth. He told her everything. About the throne he'd inherited too young, about the political pressures, about the advisor, Valerius, who had been a second father to him before poisoning his reign from within. He laid his entire world at her feet, a world of duty, danger, and destiny. She listened, and none of it seemed to matter as much as the simple truth of the man standing in front of her, the man who had fought for her and for whom she had fought back. His eyes, clear and golden, held hers. They were filled with a raw, breathtaking vulnerability. In our world, the bond between fated mates is the most sacred law. I broke that law when I rejected you, and I have been paying the price ever since. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. You are my mate, Arya. Not because of destiny, but because of choice. My choice. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something far more real, more precious. It was the beginning of a war, a fight to reclaim his kingdom, and she was standing at the heart of it, but she was not afraid. A small smile touched her lips. Well, you broke more than one law that day, she said softly. His brow furrowed in confusion. She took his large, warm hand from her cheek and gently, deliberately, placed it on her stomach. His eyes widened, his gaze dropping down, then flying back up to meet hers, filled with a dawning, incredulous wonder. There's more, she whispered, her heart full. You're not just a king, Rydian. You're going to be a father. In his eyes, she saw kingdoms fall and galaxies be born. The war for the throne could wait. In this moment, in this ancient magical clearing, a new world had just begun. A family. And they would fight for it together.